You wake up one morning, and everything you own is gone. Not misplaced, not stolen by one thief in the night. Gone because the most powerful man in your country decided, in secret, that today was the day you would cease to exist. It sounds impossible. It sounds like fiction. But on Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, it happened to thousands of men at once. And what happened next has puzzled historians for over 700 years. Because while the men were arrested, their fleet was not. Where did the ships go? You probably know the Knights Templar as a name from video games or conspiracy documentaries. A secretive order of warrior monks, guardians of treasure, maybe even guardians of something holier than treasure. But strip away the myth for a moment. The real Templars were bankers. They were engineers. They ran what modern historians now compare to a multinational corporation, moving money and goods across the medieval world with a level of coordination almost nobody else could match. And King Philip IV of France owed them a great deal of money.
That debt is where this story actually begins. Not with magic, not with buried gold, with a king who was broke, and an order that was rich enough to make him uncomfortable. Philip needed the Templars gone, and he needed a reason that would hold up in front of the Pope. So he manufactured one. Heresy, idol worship, secret rituals whispered about in taverns but never proven in court. Was any of it true? Historians still argue about the details, but the consensus is clear on one thing. The charges were, at best, wildly exaggerated, and at worst, invented from nothing. On that October morning, Philip's men moved with terrifying precision. Every Templar preceptory in France was raided at the same hour on the same day. Thousands of knights, sergeants, and clergy were seized before they even understood what was happening. It was one of the most coordinated arrests in medieval history, and it worked almost perfectly. Almost.
Because when the king's men reached the Templar port at La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast of France, something was missing. The order's fleet. Gone. Not damaged, not scuttled. Simply not there. A fleet the Templars used to move funds, supplies, and pilgrims across the sea had vanished in the days before the arrests, as if someone had known exactly what was coming. Think about that for a second. An operation this secretive, this sudden, and somehow the ship slipped away first? That single detail is the reason this mystery has never fully closed. Because if the fleet escaped, where did it go? And more importantly, who warned them?
Some accounts put the number of missing vessels at 18. Others say it was closer to 50. The exact figure is lost, the way most exact figures from 1307 are lost. But the shape of the event survives in royal correspondence and later chronicles. Philip's officials searched the Templar treasury at the Paris Temple and found it stripped bare, the coffers empty, the most valuable relics and records nowhere to be found. Whoever cleared that vault knew the raid was coming days in advance, not hours. That is not the behavior of a surprised organization. That is the behavior of one that had already made a plan.
For centuries, the leading theory pointed north, to Scotland. At the time, Scotland was under excommunication, locked in its own dispute with the Pope over Robert the Bruce's claim to the throne. Papal authority barely applied there. If you were a Templar captain looking for a place where the Pope's arrest order carried no weight, Scotland was close to ideal.
Local legend claims Templar ships landed near the Scottish coast, and that surviving knights folded quietly into Scottish society, some even fighting for Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1313. It's a compelling story. It's also almost impossible to prove. Historian Malcolm Barber, one of the most respected voices on the Templars, has pointed out repeatedly that there is no solid documentary evidence placing Templar forces at Bannockburn. The legend grew centuries later, largely through Freemason retellings in the 1700s, long after any witnesses were dead. So is the Scotland theory pure fiction? Not entirely. Something clearly did happen to that fleet. The question is whether Scotland is the true destination or simply the most romantic guess that happened to survive. Why does the Scotland story persist anyway, if the evidence is this thin? Because it fits a shape people already wanted to believe. A defeated order, a rebel king, an underdog alliance against the church that had betrayed them both. It's a satisfying narrative, and satisfying narratives tend to outlive inconvenient facts. That doesn't make it worthless as a lead. It just means you have to treat it the way a real detective treats a witness with a good motive to lie. Interesting, but unverified.
There's a second theory, and this one has far stronger paperwork behind it. Portugal. Unlike France, Portugal's king, Denis, did not want to destroy the Templars. He wanted their expertise, their wealth, and their maritime knowledge for his own kingdom. So in 1319, he did something remarkably simple. He rebranded them. The Order of the Knights Templar in Portugal legally became the Order of Christ. Same properties, same castles, same fleet infrastructure. Different name on the paperwork. This is not folklore. This is documented, verifiable history. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. A little over a century later, a young Portuguese prince became the Grand Master of that very Order of Christ. His name was Henry, and history remembers him as Henry the Navigator. Under his direction, Portuguese ships began sailing further into the Atlantic than any European power had gone before, launching the age of exploration. And on the sails of those ships was a red cross, the same red cross the Templars had worn for 2 centuries.
Coincidence? Maybe. But you have to sit with the shape of it. An order with unmatched maritime experience gets legally preserved in exactly one country. 1 century later, that country becomes the first in Europe to master transatlantic navigation under a leader from that same order's bloodline of institutions. Historian Helen Nicholson, one of the foremost scholars on the military orders, has noted that the continuity between the Templars and the Order of Christ in Portugal is one of the clearest, most historically grounded survival stories among all the post-suppression theories. Not the buried treasure, not the secret bloodlines, just an organization that changed its name and kept sailing. There's a detail here that rarely makes it into the documentaries. When Christopher Columbus sailed west in 1492, he had spent years living in Portugal, married into a Portuguese noble family, and studied navigational charts developed under the influence of the very institution that grew out of the old Templar network. He wasn't a Templar himself. Nobody is claiming that. But the maritime knowledge, the shipbuilding techniques, the accumulated decades of Atlantic exploration he drew on, all trace back through Portugal, through Henry the Navigator, through the Order of Christ. Follow the thread far enough, and the fingerprints of a suppressed medieval order are pressed into the discovery of an entire hemisphere.
But what about the men who were actually caught? What happened to them?
Most confessed under torture, then recanted the moment they were out of the torturer's hands. Jacques de Molay, the order's last Grand Master, was one of them. He confessed, recanted, and was ultimately burned at the stake in Paris in 1314, protesting his innocence until the very end. For centuries, the Church's exact stance on his guilt remained frustratingly unclear. That changed in 2001, when Vatican historian Barbara Frale rediscovered a document that had been misfiled in the Vatican secret archives for nearly 700 years. It's called the Chinon Parchment, and it records Pope Clement V privately absolving the Templars of heresy in 1308, even while publicly allowing Philip's persecution to continue.
Let that sink in. The Pope knew. He knew the charges didn't hold up, and he cleared them in a private ruling that stayed buried in an archive until the 21st century. Politically, he still let the order fall, because standing against a French king willing to burn his own subjects wasn't a fight the papacy could easily win. So the Templars weren't destroyed because they were guilty. They were destroyed because they were useful enough to steal from and inconvenient enough to sacrifice. So where does that leave the fleet?
The honest answer is that historians don't have a single confirmed destination. What they have is a pattern, one that repeats every time a powerful, resourceful group senses danger coming before the official record admits it exists. The Templars had bankers in nearly every major port in Europe. They had informants inside royal courts. It is entirely plausible that word reached La Rochelle days, maybe hours before the arrests, giving captains just enough time to load what mattered and sail. Not because of some mystical foresight, because of an intelligence network built over 2 centuries of moving money quietly across a violent continent.
And that's really what this story is about. Underneath the treasure maps and secret societies, it's about the difference between institutions that survive and institutions that get erased. The Templars in France were erased, publicly, brutally, as a warning to anyone else who might grow too wealthy to control. But the parts of the order that adapted, that changed names, changed flags, changed loyalties fast enough, those parts didn't just survive. They helped write the next chapter of world history from the deck of a Portuguese caravel.
Compare that to what happened in England. King Edward II was pressured by the Pope to arrest English Templars too, but he dragged his feet for over a year. And when the order was finally suppressed there, most members were simply absorbed into other religious houses with modest pensions. No mass executions, no burning at the stake, just a quiet administrative dissolution. 3 different kings, 3 completely different outcomes for the exact same organization. Doesn't that tell you something? The Templars' fate was never really about what they had done. It was about what each ruler decided they could afford to do to them.
You've probably lived through a version of this yourself, even if the stakes were nowhere near as dramatic. A company restructures overnight, and the people who saw it coming a week early are the ones who land on their feet. A system changes its rules, and the ones who move fastest, quietly, before the announcement even goes public, are the ones still standing when the dust settles. Power rarely destroys everything it claims to destroy. It usually just relabels what it can't afford to lose and lets the rest take the fall.
So the next time someone tells you the Templars vanished without a trace, you can tell them the truth. They didn't vanish. They rebranded. They relocated. And in at least one kingdom, they helped chart the modern world. The ships didn't disappear into legend. They sailed straight into history, just under someone else's flag. And that morning in 1307, when everything you owned was gone, for a fleet full of Templar sailors already miles out at sea, it never was.